Hi, everyone. I'm Beth Johnson, and with me today is my co-host, Franck Marchis. And this is a special live edition of the Grudge Report, SETI Institute's science show following Star Trek Discovery's latest episodes. I have to warn you, spoilers abound, so if you haven't watched this last season, turn back while you still can. Joining us today is our special guest, Dr. Erin Macdonald, the science consultant for the Star Trek franchise. Welcome, Erin, and thank you for zooming in with us.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here and geek
We're,
out with you lovely people.
we're so happy to have you. Pardon me, Erin and I will fangirl at each other a little bit today. It's all good.
Just brace yourselves. It'll be good.
All right, so this season saw us arriving in the future, dealing with the burn, which of course we will definitely talk about. Meeting some new characters, Booker, Grudge, which we have obviously, holding dear to our hearts and naming our own show after. Meeting the Emerald Chain, finding out about the Federation. It was a big season, and it was kind of almost like this. I love the way that Discovery has sort of been a bit like new on. It's not a episode by episode storyline. It's like this whole overarching plot. So I understand this was your first season working on Star Trek. So what was the experience like for you, first off?
I mean, it's amazing, and it's obviously amazing. I'm just a big Star Trek fan, but it's these sort of jobs and these roles. This is a long road. I'm not gonna earworm everyone with that, but it really takes a long time.
Evil.
I know. I'm so sorry. I said that naturally once and then got called out, and it's just I can't not say it. But it really was. I started out by giving talks on the science behind Star Trek at sci-fi conventions like Dragon Con and Awesome Con and all these other ones. And then when I moved to Los Angeles, started to meet some of the people working in Star Trek, and they invited me to give these talks at the official Star Trek conventions, something they had done in the past, and they wanted to bring back the science of Star Trek things. And there's just a huge calling for that. And so it was kind of through working with the CBS team and getting looped in, then getting a chance to meet some of the writers on Discovery. I mean, we hit it off. They just thought it was a great opportunity to bring me on. And, the season 3 had the new showrunner, Michelle Paradise, and her and I kind of chatted a few times, and the decision was made to bring me on to do the astrophysics for season 3. And then they also hired Professor Mohammed Noor from Duke University to do the biology. And we actually were already friends from the convention circuit. So it was just great to be like, hey.
So what you're saying is don't pepper you with a lot of biology questions.
Do not. We will get Professor Noor on the phone.
It's too bad. That's the topic we had for the entire 1 hour.
Yeah, no,
I'm
exactly.
Sorry.
We wanted to talk about the antenna, the 6-chambered heart, no, okay.
Yeah.
I very purposely did not put all the biology on our list for today because I know Franck really struggled on just like reading stuff, but like us figuring it out too was not. Neither one of us are biologists either. So
well,
I'm sure we can write papers with what we made up during the show.
I will, since Professor Noor isn't here to help answer those, I will give a plug for his YouTube channel, which is called BioTrekkie Explains, and he's got he actually did a series with Jane Brooks, who played Admiral Cornwell in the first seasons, explaining all the biology behind it. So I recommend check that out for sure.
I have a question for Erin before we go through some of the scientific topics. So, Erin, how did you? You're an astronomer. Can you tell us a story? There is a lot of viewers who ask how they can be part of a science show or write science fiction, so be part of a science team for a show like that. So, how did it start for you?
Yeah, I mean, I get asked that question a lot. Is like, how can I do what you do, and can I just steal your job? And I get that because that was me. And so my background is in astrophysics. I did my doctorate and some postdoctoral work as part of the LIGO collaboration studying gravitational waves. And from that, I mean, I've always been a big sci-fi fan, and procrastinating my PhD thesis involved watching a lot of Star Trek. And so my brain was like, hey, I'm getting my degree in general relativity. I bet I could figure out how warp drive works. And so I kind of dug in and played around with it. And then when I left academia, I really missed teaching. Teaching was sort of the big passion for me. And so I was finding out as many opportunities as I could to teach. And so that's kind of what led me to go to these conventions. And then it's really just about meeting people and being and understanding what the creative side needs. I think a lot of science fiction writers have tried to hire science consultants, and it has not gone great because the scientists come in thinking they're like reviewing a peer paper, and you have to realize you're there to just add sprinkles. Like they are baking the cake, they're icing it. That is their project. And so for me, what I found really helped me build a lot of great relationships was bringing this, like, because I also had a background kind of in the arts, was to bring a yes and improv approach to that consulting, to just be like, okay, so you want to do that, and you want to go to this universe, and you want to travel through time, and okay, all right, let's do it. Let's just make sure we don't say anything wrong, and we'll try to find some opportunity to put some stuff in there. And so that's kind of what helped. It's really, being a science consultant is all about your relationships. It's all about having these great relationships with writers and being able to understand the creative process as you go as well.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead, Beth.
So let's dig into the meat of it. Let's just go for the big one right off the top. Talk to us about the burn.
So the burn was the mystery through season 3 of what is the burn, what caused all dilithium to destabilize, and
I mean, you have your little sign back there, right?
I have my little sign they got. Will stay with me forever. I'm very proud of it. But this wasn't something that I came up. This is something that, from a story perspective, they went into the season knowing they wanted to do this, knowing that they wanted to have this, really have the galaxy be fractured in a way that it hadn't been fractured before, and kind of had a sense of, okay, this is our big emotional arc. We want to have the reveal be this, character who'd been abandoned on this planet that had a lot of dilithium. And then they were like, we need some science because this is Star Trek. So that's when we got the call. And like I said, they brought in Professor Noor and myself for me to kind of figure out how dilithium could destabilize almost instantly, but not all of it, but most of it, and have this effect. And then for Professor Noor, it was about how you could tie that to the genetics of a kid, and how, so him and I worked a lot together on this, which was really, really fun. But so what I was able to do was to try to uncover more of the science of dilithium, which is a fictional particle. It's been around from Star Trek from the beginning, but is used as sort of a regulator for warp engines. And a lot of people mistakenly think, and understandably, think that dilithium is the fuel itself that you're injecting into the warp core. But what dilithium really is it's more like a catalyst. It's like a control rod, almost like in a nuclear reactor. It really kind of, what it does is it regulates these matter-antimatter collisions that happen. And when those happen, that gives off a lot of energy that powers the warp drive. So the idea is, if your dilithium destabilizes, then it is no longer able to control those processes. And then you have this cascade chain reaction, like a nuclear explosion, that you have this matter-antimatter that's all combining really fast, and then it destabilizes. And so that's why the burn itself was really isolated to ships that were at warp or were actively using their warp cores. That caused them to explode, not necessarily all the dilithium everywhere to suddenly disappear, but any that were actively being used. So that's kind of the gloss over. But then we want to really add science because it is Star Trek. And so I found myself writing canon for dilithium, which was pretty awesome. Going through every mention of dilithium that we've seen, every description of how it worked, and finding opportunities where it's like it maybe hadn't been discussed as much, that we could dig into it a little bit more. And really the big key that we brought to it for season 3 was this idea that there's a subspace component to dilithium, that dilithium
that was interesting.
Thank you. Because it, you know, initially, even when you first kind of hear dilithium, we know lithium is an element. And so it sounds like maybe it's a molecule, but then later on, you know, the science consultants back in the 90s, they kind of stepped away from that in TNG and Voyager and DS9, that dilithium was like an actual particle itself. And so what I kind of worked on was this idea that maybe the special thing about dilithium and the reason it works so well in these environments is that in the future, in Star Trek time, we have discovered that there are fundamental particles, like we have gluons, you know, we have these things that make up bosons that we can see and touch. Maybe we discovered that there are subatomic particles that exist in the complex plane. This is going to get a little sciencey, but it's really going into the mathematics of space-time and this idea that maybe there's more dimensions to it. And so that if you mathematically look at space-time, you can actually create a complex plane mathematically. And I mean complex as in like imaginary numbers, not difficult to think about, even though it is, but that's what the word complex means there.
Too, right.
Yeah. But that complex plane really is what subspace is. And so that we find that there are these subatomic particles that exist partially in, or that they exist in the complex plane in subspace, that they make up part of dilithium. And so the fact that they have this, that dilithium exists in normal space and in subspace based on its subatomic particle, you know, how they're combined, then that allows that communication and the burn to happen faster than the speed of light, to permeate through subspace. And then that, because then it's that resonant frequency is being sent through subspace, it basically shatters the molecular structure of dilithium. And so it was fun.
Wow. Wow. You really scienced the Star Trek there.
I'm amazed by the rationale, the way you described dilithium. I didn't think it would be something like that. It's a great idea. So one question, when you started thinking about subspace, you had to go through all the show where they were talking about dilithium to make sure that you were consistent, or at least consistent with 90% of the time, or you, that's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. It's a lot of Star Trek. You know, thankfully there's great resources, and there are plenty of people who work in the franchise who are just as dedicated to this, that I can call up and just be like, okay, I send out my explanation on dilithium to these people whom I trust, that I'm like, if they're okay with it, then I can sleep at night, you know? So I have people who have written Star Trek books, who've worked in the canon for decades and all of those things, that I'm just like, can you just do a sanity check? Because I think I'm good. I've done all the research I can, but I at least need someone who's sort of, you know, been blessed by the Star Trek franchise to have an eye on those things. And that helps a lot. But it really is. I mean, I keep a notebook next to me when I'm watching Star Trek just for fun, on the off chance they have like one little thing that doesn't make it into, you know, wikis or discussion, then I can just be like, okay, all right, I got to remember that one.
So we found ourselves relying on Memory Alpha a lot. Do you do the same?
It is a good resource. I mean, any sort of fan wikis are brilliant. You know, I kind of entered fandom in the early 2000s, which was like peak live journal forum, like compendiums of, you know, knowledge that people add. So I certainly use them, but given my background and this weight, it's a glorious weight that I feel to not screw up I'm always checking my raw data or my raw sources, that if it's referenced in these wikis, then I'm like, okay, let me go watch that, make sure they translated that right. But at least it's a good, like any wiki, you know,
like any wiki. Yeah. You go back and follow the links. You don't just say, okay, this is the correct thing, and your professor goes, no. You go and find the references.
Exactly. So it's fun, and I try to do the best I can, but it can be a little bit of pressure sometimes. It's a little bit stressful.
So shall we talk about the Spore Drive, since we are talking about exotic physics here?
Sure, although I will caveat that I was not a science consultant for season 1 or 2, and I did not invent the Spore Drive. So I can talk about how I have mentally scienced it and how we work on it now going forward, how we think about it.
That's fine, because I think with the way that this season kicked off, we sort of took seasons 1 and 2 and went, yeah, we're going to go put those in a box and leave them back there. And now we're going to build our own thing. So you can absolutely talk about the Spore Drive going forward. I mean, things are very different from when we started anyway, because, you know, we don't have tardigrades, and
yeah,
it definitely got more complex. So what was your involvement on the Spore Drive this season?
So really what I did, because I had my start giving these science of talks, you know, I had gone through seasons 1 and 2 for these talks at conventions, and actually with Professor Noor, we were giving talks on the science of discovery, and had kind of broken this all down even before we were working on Star Trek. And that's why it was so glorious when we both got put on as science consultants, and it was just like, oh, hi. But I mean, we had this whole running joke where we gave a science of Star Trek Discovery talk, and that's actually how Professor Noor met Jane Brooks, because, you know, my friend Mary Chifo, who I met working on Star Trek and going to conventions, she brought the whole Discovery cast at DragonCon to our Science of Discovery talk, and they hid in the back, and then Ken Mitchell revealed their presence during the Q&A, and everyone lost their brain, and it was really, really fun. But
wow.
Great memories of that. Yeah, it was amazing. But so what we had done, we had this like kind of joke thing where we would give all of these science about, you know, how tardigrades work, how, you know, genetic recombination works, and then we were just kind of like, and is there anything else that we want? And of course, everyone's like, Spore Drive, explain the Spore Drive. And the way that we had kind of thought about it, so obviously it's a more biology based, but it's this idea that there is a network, and this is where we kind of have to think about it literally versus allegorically. And that's kind of the twist that I've taken on it a little bit, because when it's described in the opening seasons, it seems very literal. Like there's an actual mushroom network that goes through our entire universe. But the way I've kind of worked with it in my mind is that, okay, well, you know, these spores and this idea that you have this fungal network, this mycelial network that permeates our universe, that could exist in the equivalent of subspace in some other dimension. And that the thing I like is that when you take a step back and you actually look at the superstructure of our universe, it does kind of look like spores. You know, there's our brain neurons and spores and the superstructure of like galaxy clusters and how they're all networked together, that how they naturally, right?
Yeah. Okay. I see that. I can. All right.
Very proud of that connection. So,
I'm going to be proud of that connection for you. That's really good.
Thank you. And so the way that I've been thinking about it is that it really is just more this like network that permeates, and that you have this molecule, this fungus, or something that appears to have fungal like properties, can connect you to that. And so if you think about sort of your sheet of space-time, you can think about this network kind of sitting on top of it. And then if you're able to kind of jump into it using, you know, this connection that they have with the spores that Stamets has, then that allows you to go faster than light. And you know, it's a new way of traveling faster than light in general that Star Trek hadn't really used before, because Star Trek tends to use wormholes, warp drives, these sort of naturally occurring holes, or building a bubble around your ship. They'd not used jump drives before. And that's really thinking about like Battlestar Galactica or Stargate, these points where the universe is kind of folded over on itself, that's kind of how you can think about this network being used. And so, you know, we have opportunities to say, yeah, there's, you know, they've gone a certain distance in the past, but, you know, could there be limitations to that? Or like, how could we handle that in the future? So, I mean, it's exciting, but I think to this point that because we don't really need to explain how it works, because there was so much of that in season 1 with Stamets and the tardigrade, that it's now just like, all right, Discovery has this capability. How are we going to utilize that going forward? And really, what is it more about Discovery's engine that makes it different than the other ships? So that's kind of how we're using it. Good times. You're stunned into silence. I love it.
I'm going to take it while Franck figures out what he wants to ask you next, because I think his mind is just spinning over there. I'm going to give some shout outs here. So we have viewers coming here from Minneapolis, Sweden, Oregon, India, the Philippines, the United Kingdom, Brazil, Wisconsin, Denmark, Pakistan, Chile, Pennsylvania, Portugal. Wow, this is an international audience.
Awesome.
Chile. Wow. Okay. Yeah. So everywhere. People are just watching from.
Welcome. And
Thank you.
Maybe you should remind them that they can ask questions. We're gonna take some time to answer.
Yeah, I know Rebecca's been posting notes in there telling people to ask questions. I've got it. Wow. On Twitch, we have someone watching from Switzerland. That's very exciting. Awesome. Welcome, Twitch. I have
a lot of questions, and we say we're gonna invite you again. So just
okay.
Now it's gonna be official. But one thing I want to talk about is Kepler 174d.
We're calling you out on this one, Erin.
The entire community of professional astronomers heard about the fact that Kepler 174d was mentioned in Terra Firma on Star Trek Discovery. And everybody has been going through the archive trying to understand why this one and why another one, and how come in this other universe there is a Kepler. So this is an idea of yours. Were you involved in that?
So like I said, I kind of preface this. It's actually not as exciting because I didn't put it in there. And the cool thing is, and this is the great opportunity that I have, is that the writers of Terra Firma were, I think the teleplay was by Alan McElroy, and then with Bo-Young Kim and Erica Lapolt, they wrote that episode. And those three are amazing science, like on the spectrum of science fiction. They are great science people. I get scripts from them and I'm just like, I don't know why you hire me. Like, this is brilliant. Like, you're putting science in here that is brilliant. And so opportunities like that, I think, they've also used gravitational waves we got to see this season. And I was like, yeah, brilliant. Like, I don't need to science that. I have big thumbs up for me on that one. But yeah, I mean, I love the fact that, because as you mentioned, the Kepler 174b was in the mirror universe. And so it's like, are we the mirror universe? That I think is more just for philosophical assessments of our own behavior as humans. But, I think I the chart behind me, this is the Federation history map. And so I love kind of seeing just all the different planets that we have. And maybe, you could think about this way. Kepler 174b was studied in the mirror universe and it exists, but it could be, and this is not establishing canon. This is just me talking as a fan off the top of my head. But it could be that in the prime universe, Kepler 174b is now like, I don't know, like Andorra, it could be one of the other planets that we know and love that got renamed later. So who knows? I'm sorry I don't have I would love to inject the conversation with this great lore about how Kepler 174b is in there and what universe we live in, but it's more just, like you said, kind of a cool shout out just to at least, and I think that's what Star Trek has always been so great at and has a long legacy of doing, is injecting little nuggets of current science that at least intrigues the viewer and continues to inspire future generations to become scientists by doing those little things where they're like, wait, so so now I'm learning about the Kepler telescope and what exoplanets are, and I've fallen down a rabbit hole, and now I want to be an astronomer. And so
that's exactly what I was about to say. It's a kind of a great way to connect. By connecting with a few of these comparisons with what's really happened in the real world at the moment, Star Trek has been bringing a lot of people into science. So it's great. And I'm pretty sure Bill Borocki, the PI of Kepler, also received the notice that in the Star Trek Discovery, they are mentioning one of the planets discovered by the Kepler mission. So you probably don't know, but the Kepler mission, the pipeline was designed at the SETI Institute by the SETI Institute researchers. So for us, it's a big deal that suddenly these planets came out of the blue in the show. And we had an entire story of how there was this intelligent species on Kepler 174d, is D not B. And if you want to know more, watch the show on Terra Firma.
Well,
Franck came up with a great theory. It was wonderful, but we can't recreate it off the top of our head, so you have to go watch the episode.
Okay, it's one of those. I gotta say though, I loved Terra Firma. That was one where it's like where I have now learned that if I'm reading a script and it's making me emotional in some respect, whether I'm crying or throwing my arms up and going, "Oh, that's awesome," my reaction when I get to watch it will be that times 200. So I need to like mentally prepare myself now. Because I gotta say, it was like the opening and closing of the season with the lieutenant, who name I'm spacing on now.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Franck was teasing me at the beginning of the season because he knew that I was getting all emotional over that guy. And it was like, absolutely. So the beginning of the season when she meets him and they have the whole thing with the flag and all of that, I was like tearing up and I'm like, oh my God.
And you know what I was doing? I was looking at the stars in the flag to count the number of planets and analyzing, thinking about which planet this could be and so on. I'm sorry. I'm very cold sometimes. But
no, I was a wreck. I am with Beth on that one.
Absolutely.
And it was
and then when we see him again at the end of the season and it all comes full circle, I just like sobbed like out loud. It was just like,
oh, I was a wreck. It was Lieutenant Sahil, and that was his name. And so it was like the end of the season, and then him, and then they started playing the credits with the original series theme, and then my name came on. I lost it. Like my poor partner was looking over at me and he's like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, I couldn't even speak. I was so overwhelmed.
We warned you all there was some fangirling involved here, okay?
A little bit.
I'm with you. So I feel so much better to know that I was not alone in my like, I need Kleenex. Hold on.
Not at all. I was a wreck.
Do you want to talk about the food, Beth?
Yeah. So Franck, well, honestly, this is Franck's topic, but it kind of became like a thing for us. So Franck noticed when we did the sort of the we're all struggling dinner that Saru tries to put on that becomes like every Thanksgiving dinner ever in like a capsule. But we noticed that food had become kind of important in this season, like both in Prime universe and in the Mirror universe, and that it keeps coming up, to the point where there's the whole conversation about the apple and how, it's what it's made out of and how that's used to kind of intimidate her a little bit. And we were just really fascinated by the fact that food had become such a central theme. Did you have any part in that happening, or?
No, I mean, I really like that. And I love that you picked up on that. And knowing, because I was brought in, partially through the development of season 3, where they'd already kind of done the big picture themes and concepts. The theme, the overall theme of season 3 really is about disconnection, what disconnection is and how people can become fractured in many respects, and using the burn as a main core to that, but that really is that subtle theme that goes throughout. And then and I am not speaking for Michelle Paradise or Alex Kurtzman or anyone, and I'm saying this is just my own interpretation, but I would argue that the presence of food there, because food is one of those things you need, no matter what species you are, you need some sort of nutrients. That is a connector, and that's something that brings people together. And like you said, the Thanksgiving scene, I think, really drives that home, that we use food as a way to connect with people and to mend disconnects. And I think that's why that stood out. But then to continually have that theme of food throughout being this like shared thing that everyone needs and a way to bring people together. I think it's just brilliant storytelling.
It's a trans-species way of communicating as well. That's kind
exactly.
of,
yeah, exactly.
It's the food that revealed the true origin of the burn, in fact, and help us to find out what happened.
Yeah, that's how Saru makes that connection. So it really was like a very subtle kind of thing that I was really excited when Franck picked up on it, and then we kind of looked back. It's like, yeah, no, you're right. Like this is a thing, and so then you can look for it in every episode going forward. You know, like even in the Mirror universe, there was that whole like food going on thing with the dinners, and it was all there, and it was still all about making connections and that. So Erin, what would you, if you had one question you want us to ask you right now, what would that be? What would you want to talk about?
Oh, I got one we haven't talked about yet. The coronal mass ejection. Since we're on here.
We talk about
episode 5. Yes. So
That's
episode
good.
5, Die Trying, they come across a seed vault. And that was the other sort of big plot that Professor Noor and I worked on that episode, but we actually worked on it very separately because he was working on the prion disease and he was working on all that stuff. And then I was helping with the description of the coronal mass ejections. And that was just, I was so excited to put that stuff in there. And, you know, those little dialogue things, I think when Jet calls it a space or a star burp, I was like,
I love Jet. I love Jet so much.
I do remember we mentioned the name too. And I think now we're going to use it in scientific conferences. Instead of talking about CME, we're going to call it like that, star burp.
Yeah, but it was really exciting for me to be able, because we hadn't really used coronal mass ejections in Star Trek before as space disasters. And if you know, we talked about solar flares, and they mentioned solar flares and active suns and all of those before, but not to specifically call out a coronal mass ejection and how destructive that is to a space station, or how it could be at least destructive. You know, in a long decades legacy of space disasters. It was pretty exciting to put a coronal mass ejection in there for sure.
Yeah, because we talked about how it would, you know, affect your satellite communications, and you know, I think I brought up the Carrington event and how these things can be really destructive, and more so now that we have all of this technology up in space. So, and how important it is to work on solar weather forecasting.
And then we transform ourselves into biologists, and we talk about radiation poisoning and all of this. But this, maybe we're not gonna repeat this.
Well, you know, but the interesting thing with that episode as well was it wasn't just kind of helping explain the science of it, but also helping them put in the clues that they could reverse engineer and figure out that that's what happened. And that's where it's like the creative side of the science consulting comes in, to just be like, okay, like what would be there, and how would these people who have some sort of a science background, how would they dissect this? Like what information would they use to figure out that it was a coronal mass ejection? So we had a lot of conversations about that, and I'm really happy with how it turned out.
So I have a question about this episode too. I'm sorry, Beth. The spacecraft, the takeoff, and inside the takeoff we have the seed, the vault. It does look like the seed vault that we have in Norway. For the is that something that you were involved?
So in the design of it, no, but I know. So Sean, I believe it's Sean Cochran was the writer of that episode. Let me confirm that, But that was, you know, this inspiration of learning about the seed vault in Norway, and then realizing like that makes sense, that, you know, advanced future space, you'd have something like that somewhere to preserve this sort of biology that you find on planets. So the concept of it, I know, you know, I remember had to do with that. We're trying to think of different weird ties to our world, and yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah, that was a very cool shout out for this interesting project that
I'm
glad you liked it. That's awesome.
So our Rebecca is behind the scenes feeding us questions, and she's fed us one from herself here. So feel free to ask questions in chat. We're not getting a lot here. Did they know what caused the burn at the beginning of the season? Was that all plotted out, or did they kind of figure that out as it went along?
Oh no, they architect these stories well in advance. They, like I said, I've worked a lot with Michelle. I'm just in awe of her. And I think that people should know who she is and give lots of credit to her for this sort of stuff. Cause, she's great at this sort of storytelling. And so this idea, I think that concept of, like I said, that disconnection, and then that source being a kid and being a very innocent, simple thing that caused this massive destruction, that's there from the beginning. And then the little fine details go, build on from there about like, okay, well, why was he abandoned? Where did they find him? How long ago was, all of those sort of things then build up from there. But I was brought on well after that fact, where they were like, okay, we have this idea. please science the dilithium.
So they don't start recording, and then a week later, a week before the recording of the new episode, you get a phone call and say, you need to find an explanation. It doesn't work like that.
God. Not for something like that. I have had occasionally chaotic moments where this has happened to me a couple of times now, where they're doing they are in production, either in production where they're filming, or they're in post-production and they're doing what's called ADR, where they're dubbing over their lines as it's all being edited together, if they're trying to get the cuts right. And then there's been a couple panicked calls where it's like, okay, we're editing it and this explanation does not fit in the time that we have, so we need another explanation that can be 5 seconds or less, that and we need to have it yesterday. So
you do have
those moments are fun. And then helping to figure out, like, once a post-production and stuff comes in, making sure dialogue matches up with what we're seeing, that kind of comes into it too. But most of this is all taken care of well ahead of time. So
I have a question for you. That's something that Beth and I discuss a lot during the show: the naming of things. I remember you mentioned somewhere in the show they mentioned Riccardo Giacconi, who used to be a director at ESO, mentioned the Tikhov, mentioned also the Verubin Nebula. So are you involved in the naming? So maybe you can explain who are all these people if you're involved in the naming.
So I was pretty excited to help with the Verubin Nebula. That's got a little bit of me sprinkled in there. Because, and that kind of had to do a little bit more in the earlier development, where we were playing around with the science that we're using. And this wasn't, so this doesn't need to be taken as canon at all, because it wasn't really something that we got into, but where my brain had been going with this idea of subspace particles and these complex subatomic particles, that I was figuring that humans had discovered that as a component of dark matter. Like, that's just my own headspace, where I was trying to think of like, okay, well, what particles do we know might exist, but we haven't discovered, and why haven't we discovered them? And so realizing that dark matter isn't, made up of bosons. What else could it be made up? Okay, well, what if we had this complex subatomic particle? So dark matter was kind of this thread that got me to the dilithium solution. And so then we kind of had this idea of dark matter. And I think at one point Tilly mentions that there's a lot of dark matter in the Verubin Nebula, but that the tie to the burn, that we didn't really need to use that. But that was just this trail of breadcrumbs that my brain lay as we were solving that. And so then naming it after Vera Rubin was awesome and can be publicly confirmed. I know there was a lot of speculation if it was actually named after Vera Rubin, and
maybe you should
give the thumbs
Vera
up on
Rubin, because our viewers may not know who she was.
Oh, so she kind of put the threads together for the discovery of dark matter, sort of figuring out the rotational planes of our galaxy, and realizing that things were moving faster than they should have been, and that there should be more stuff there than what we're observing. And that was kind of what led us to dark matter, to realizing that there's a lot of stuff in the universe that we can't see, interact with, deal with. We just see it interact with normal matter gravitationally. And she was really instrumental in that. like a lot of discoveries, I think she did not get the credit that she deserves at the time. And so part of this is trying to honor some of those scientists who were sort of overshadowed at the time, and now we can try to fix some of that. So I was pretty happy to put her in the Star Trek universe. And, you know, she passed in, I think, 2016. And so I hope she'd be proud of that.
I think so. Thank you for doing this. I think it's great that you give names to scientists of object and phenomena on the Star Trek universe. So Giacconi is also from you?
No. So naming things, I usually do not have a lot of say in that. It's only, you know, like I said, these times where we'll be on a phone call or I'll be in a writer's room where they're trying to figure that out. And it's like, okay, well, we need to come up with a name for this. And do you have any ideas? And so if I'm there when they're doing that, then we can throw those out. But like I said, I mean, a lot of those writers are very scientifically savvy and big fans of science as well as sci-fi. And so putting those names in there, that's all them for sure.
Yeah, so just Giacconi is the name of Riccardo Giacconi, who was a director of European Southern Observatory when I was working there. And that's the reason I noticed right away the name. He's an astronomer who basically initiated the field of X-ray astronomy.
Awesome. I love that. And I love that connection stood out to you. That's fabulous.
All right. Well, I think that's kind of it. I don't really see any questions coming in.
We just explained everything so well. So
that too. I mean, I could listen to you talk all day about the science, honestly.
Go ahead.
Did you have another question, Franck?
Question. The planet.
Oh yeah.
Interesting part. I'm sorry. I just want to another topic. I really want to know a bit more about this Quasian planet and it's an exoplanet. It's habitable. There is this kind of interesting empathic species. A book is one of them, and they have this insectoid. So, what was the involvement in the creation of this world?
Hardly any. I think it's this creation, this idea that they want to have, and I love this, that they have an empathic species, which we've seen in Star Trek before, but it has connections to more than just other bipedal, Federation type species, but they can connect to plants and trees and animals and all of that. I really like, and then introducing Book as sort of a conservationist and really trying to, especially in the darker times that we find the galaxy in at the beginning of season 3, where you now have, we don't have the Federation, we have the Emerald Chain, and that they are being more aggressive with like poaching and all of that you then have a species that is dedicated to, or at least a character that's dedicated to conserving these. So, I mean, really not, like I said, season 3 was just my start working in Star Trek. And it actually wasn't until kind of near the end that they brought me on to work on all of the shows full time. So now those relationships have built, and so now I'm getting brought in earlier in the process for future seasons because they know me and they've worked with me before. But like I said, I don't want to take a ton of I don't want to take credit for the brilliance that season 3 was, because they did such a good job creating these exoplanets, putting all these little scientific Easter eggs in there, putting all of these brilliant stories and themes throughout it. Like I said, the role of the science consultant is just little sprinkles and they really, it's an amazing team of writers, and it's just been an honor to work with them.
So, are you working on season 4?
Yeah. So season 4, I think is announced that is in production. So I've been helping out with that. I'm very excited about. And then I didn't work on Lower Decks, season 1, but upcoming is the Star Trek Nickelodeon show, Prodigy. Mm-hmm. I'm a Janeway girl. Get excited about it. It's so good. It's just, I love it so much. So it's one of those things I just want to scream into the worlds. But like I said, CBS was very proud of me that I sat on the Janeway thing. Until they made me
that was impressive. I remember because you have your own Discord, and I remember being in there, and when that finally came out, and we were all like, "Erin, you managed not to say anything."
I was sitting on that for a long time, but that was such a good moment when I found out that I would get to help with Janeway dialogue. It's all happening.
To go back to season 4, is anything you can tell us about it?
No, of course not. But nice try. No, I appreciate that.
I tried. I had to.
I always think of that picture of Jonathan Frakes with this T-shirt that says "I signed an NDA," and I think of you whenever those questions come into my head, because it's like, yeah, you can't answer this.
Yeah, I know. And a good friend of mine and group member in the Discord, Andy, made me a shirt that said that was the same thing, the Frakes thing. Like, don't ask me anything. I signed an NDA, but. You've got to ask the questions. I appreciate it. I just won't answer.
So, if it weren't plague times, do you think you'd be able to hang out with some of the cast, or do you guys chat? Are you a part of their little squad? Do you role play with them and all of that stuff?
Part of the family. Yeah, because I started at the convention circuit, it was through the actors mostly that I had that connection. And I mentioned Mary Chifo, her and I, the writers on Discovery, put us together because she was doing her first convention after it was like she had done Comic-Con, but then the season hadn't aired yet. And then the season came out, and then it was her first convention. And I was going to be speaking at it. It was in Colorado. And so they were like, you two really should hang out. And they were not wrong. So Mary is one of my best friends, and I just think she's amazing. And we just get along so well. So it's been great that Star Trek has brought us together, and then, Ken as well. So the Discovery team feel like we have that bond. But, I've been honored enough to do the Star Trek cruise and to do Star Trek Las Vegas. And so I met that's always been very surreal experiences. And, but then I had the absolute honor of when I was announced as the science consultant, and I started doing these conventions sort of after the cruise. The cruise was in March 2020. Like, we came back from that and everything shut down. So that was like the last memory I have of seeing people and hugging people. And yeah. But Jonathan Frakes reached out and just said that he's thrilled that I'm part of the Star Trek family now, and that, this is a fun journey. And I felt very much like he welcomed me into the fold on an official thing. And that meant a lot.
Aww.
So he's been very incredibly.
I'm gonna have a fangirl moment over here. Franck, you talk to her for a sec.
He's just incredibly supportive and still involved in Star Trek, and just loves what I'm able to bring to the table and wants to support me and help my future. And I'm just, flabbergasted by that, because I really respect him, obviously.
That's incredible.
So much.
That's wonderful. Oh, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Okay. There's a question that came up. I don't even know if you can answer this, but I know you're working on the Prodigy, and NDAs are a thing. Does Q still exist?
Oh, I'm not going near that one. I'm not touching any of that. Again, nice try, but there's no way I'm touching that. That's a big question, but I like the question, but cannot answer. But I thought his appearance on Lower Decks, I loved that. I just absolutely loved it. I thought that was hilarious.
All right. I'm trying to think of one. You got anything?
Yeah. So you said the design is already set up and so on. What about the propulsion system of the spacecraft, the design of the spacecraft? Are they going to ask you to participate to this in the future, or?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of the best way to answer this. That's not necessarily been my expertise. There's lots of people out there who Rick Sternbach and Mike Okuda, and there's like a long legacy of these ship designers. Like that's what they do. And that's not my background either. My background is theoretical astrophysics. So ship design is not one, but certainly, I mean, this idea of like, hey, if there's anything involved with the technology of the ship, keeping an eye on that. If there's, any sort of new weird technology that's being introduced, just sort of given a pass. I have my next gen tech manual on my bookshelf that I use on a regular basis. It's very helpful. But yeah, I mean, that ship design, that's more from a artistic perspective, and then just making sure the way the technology is described and utilized makes sense.
Yeah, I was thinking about this when we saw the explosion of the last episode, and they blew up part of the spaceship, and there is a separation of the, how you call this, Beth, again?
The nacelles.
The nacelles, yeah.
It's a French word, so I should remember this one. The nacelle. The premise I will say it in French, so nobody will understand me. And the spaceship is going out of warp drive. So you're involved you basically kind of help bringing the physics when they make some changes like that.
Yeah, so that nacelle concept, this idea that you have the warp core that generates the warp bubble, and then it's really the nacelles that keep it stable and keep the shape, supported, and help sort of power the other bubbles that get built, the warp factors 1, 2, 3, and 4, and so on. That nacelle development, I mean, that was done back in the next gen era. And that was something that I remember Rick Sternbach talking about, where the way they had initially developed it was that if it was like a half and half thing. So this right nacelle supported the right side, the left nacelle supported the other. And then someone asked, okay, well, what happens if the right one explodes? And he was like, the way we designed that, the ship goes goodbye. And so then they kind of refactored the concept behind it to just be like that they boost on top of each other, and that one just doesn't have enough power to support a warp bubble, particularly at the higher warp factors. And so when one goes out, or one gets blown or separated from the ship, then the warp bubble collapses, but the ship itself doesn't get shorn by the warp bubble. It's not, half of it's still at warp and half of it's not. So that's so that concept had been around, and I'm not sure how, because not to further name drop, but that was a personal conversation just where we were talking about it. And so I don't know how much of those details have really, I think they described some of that in the tech manual. Like I said, the next gen tech manual is really, really good for that stuff. But it's like, it's blueprints. Like it's a freaking technical manual.
It is a technical manual. It's somewhere in the chaos behind my green screen.
yeah. So it's fun, but again, this is part of the honor and also the terror of being involved in Star Trek, is that this is decades and decades and decades of brilliant people who have put together great science. I was honored to be on a Comic-Con virtual panel this past year with Andre Bermanis and Narain Shekar, who were the science consultants in the 90s that they did sort of the end of TNG into Voyager, and then DS9 and Voyager on top of each other. And just seeing where like their careers have gone and how and where mine is going, it was really a humbling and powerful experience for me, because I feel like there's not many of us that go on those journeys. And so figuring out where to go from here and what lies in front of me is exciting, but it's very unique.
I will just add that you said there is thousands of people being working on this show, but now there is also millions of people and fans who are basically checking everything continuously. And you are in the worst time, because now with the internet and so on, if there is one tiny mistake in the show, you can be sure that she's gonna be amplified and heard and propagated through the entire Star Trek fan universe. And
yep,
so,
doesn't stress me out at all.
It's more like when you write a scientific article and you're wrong, it will touch maybe 400 people. That's the number of people who read an article in average. Yeah. When you make a mistake in the science fiction of the science in the fiction of Star Trek. There is a lot of conversation behind that.
But it is, even though millions of people might see it, and I might get all the blame, I think particularly too, because I came from being fan facing and doing conventions and then going behind the scenes, people know who I am and they know how to find me. And they will have no problem calling me out on it.
You're not exactly hiding either.
I'm not exactly hiding. This is true. But, you know, but mistakes are made. We're just human and I just do the best I can. But, you know, there's a lot of people working and there will be things I'll push back on and just say, look, science says, no, this doesn't work. And, but as long as they understand that, and if that's still what they want to do, then I'll stand by that. I'm not there to write their story. And it is, I mean, I'm obviously a huge Star Trek fan and, but people writing it are just human and we try to do our best. But it is why I completely lose sleep a lot of times.
Wow. All right. Well, we've talked for almost an hour. So I'm going to let you get back to your day and finding some more caffeine because I'm sure you're like me and looking for some more. It's in that nebula.
Coffee in that nebula.
All right. So thank you, Franck, for doing this today. Thank you, Erin, for being our guest today. This has been fabulous. We will obviously be back for the new seasons of Star Trek Discovery and The Expanse, which Franck covers with my colleague Margaret. And we're going to see if we can find some stuff to kind of tide you over until then, because I don't think those will be back until the fall. So if you have suggestions, make sure you leave them in the comments on our videos. You know, give us a heads up of what you'd like us to cover. We're talking about maybe doing some classic Trek, some other science fiction shows. So if anybody's got anything that they want us to talk about the science in, we will happily go do that. Yeah, comments down below and on our YouTube videos and Facebook videos, and let us know what you want to see, and we will take that all into consideration. And thank you everybody for watching, and live long and prosper.